In the winter of 1944, the world felt like it was ending. Europe was burning, not just with fire, but with fear. Snow covered the forests of Belgium, thick and silent, hiding broken bodies beneath its white surface. The newspapers would later call it a turning point. Historians would give it a name. But for the men trapped inside it, there were no grand words, only cold, hunger, and the constant question of whether they would survive another hour. Among them was a 19-year-old American soldier named Thomas Eli Carter. Before the war, Thomas had lived a small life in a small town in Ohio. His father owned a hardware store. His mother baked pies on Sundays. Thomas fixed radios, listened to baseball games, and believed the future was something you could plan. He had dreams, simple ones: college, a job, maybe a family. War erased all of that. When the United States entered World War II, Thomas didn't rush to enlist. He watched the newsreels in silence. He read the casualty lists. He hoped it would end before his name was ever needed. But his best friend, Samuel Wright, didn't wait. Samuel signed up one afternoon and told Thomas that freedom didn't protect itself. 2 weeks later, Thomas followed him. They trained together, marched together, crossed the Atlantic together, promised each other they'd come home together. By December 1944, those promises felt childish. Thomas was part of the 101st Airborne Division, stationed near the Belgian town of Bastogne. They were exhausted, under-equipped, and unprepared for what was coming. On December 16th, just before dawn, the sky exploded. German artillery tore through the forest, trees shattered, the ground shook violently enough to knock men off their feet. Radios went dead. Orders stopped making sense. They were surrounded. The cold was merciless. Temperatures dropped below zero. Many soldiers lacked proper winter gear. Some wrapped their feet in scraps of cloth and paper to keep them from freezing solid. Food was rationed. Ammunition was precious. The wounded piled up faster than medics could treat them. Still, no one spoke the word surrender. On the third night, Thomas sat in a foxhole, hands numb, breathing fog into the darkness. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket, a letter he'd started weeks earlier. "Dear Mom," it began. He stared at the words. How do you tell your mother that fear never leaves you, that every sound might be the one that kills you, that you've seen boys younger than you bleed out in the snow? Thomas folded the letter back up. He couldn't finish it. Christmas Eve arrived without celebration. That night, German voices echoed through loudspeakers, offering surrender, promising warmth and food. The American response was a single word shouted back into the cold: nuts. The word became legend, but Thomas didn't feel legendary. He felt empty. During a nighttime assault, a shell exploded near their position. Snow and dirt rained down. When Thomas looked up, Samuel was on the ground, still alive, barely. Thomas crawled to him, ignoring the bullets cracking through the trees. Samuel's breath came in shallow gasps. His hands were already stiff from the cold. "Don't let me freeze," Samuel whispered. Thomas held him, talked to him, lied to him. Samuel died before morning. When the siege finally broke and Bastogne was relieved, people called it a victory. Medals were handed out. Stories were told. Thomas received a Bronze Star. None of it brought Samuel back. When Thomas returned home in 1946, the town welcomed him like a hero. Flags waved, bands played, people shook his hand and thanked him for his service. Thomas smiled. Inside, something was broken. He couldn't sleep. Loud noises sent his heart racing. Snow made his hands shake. Silence felt dangerous. Doctors didn't have words for what he was feeling. They told him to be strong, to move on. So he did what many men did back then. he stayed quiet. He married, had children, worked long hours, built a life that looked normal from the outside. But every winter, Bastogne came back. Every Christmas Eve, he stood alone in the cold, remembering a voice that asked him not to let it freeze. In 1984, an invitation arrived, a reunion for surviving members of his unit. 40 years later, Thomas went. The forest was peaceful now. Birds sang where artillery once screamed. Tourists smiled and took photographs. Thomas stood where his foxhole had been. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he was 19 again, cold, afraid, alive. That night, he wrote a letter, not to his mother, not to the army, to himself. He wrote about guilt, about memory, about surviving when others didn't. He finished the letter for the first time. Thomas Eli Carter died a year later. He was not famous. His name is not in textbooks. But his story is the story of millions. Men who survived the war and spent the rest of their lives living with it. Thomas did not talk about the war, but the war talked to him every day. It spoke in the sound of metal hitting concrete, in the crack of thunder during summer storms, in the sudden slam of a door. Each sound dragged him back to frozen forests and dark foxholes. When his children were young, they thought their father was simply quiet, a serious man, a man who liked to sit alone on the porch at night. They didn't know that he was listening for things that no longer existed. His wife tried to understand. She learned not to wake him suddenly, learned not to touch him when he stared too long into nothing, learned that some questions should never be asked twice. Once, during a 4th of July celebration, fireworks exploded above the town. Children laughed, people clapped. Thomas dropped to the ground, hands over his head, heart racing, breath gone. When he realized where he was, people were staring. He stood up slowly, embarrassed, pretending it was nothing. That night, he locked himself in the garage and cried for a friend who died 40 years ago. The war had followed him home. As the years passed, Thomas grew older, but Bastogne stayed young, 19 forever, frozen in time. Samuel's face never aged, his voice never faded. Sometimes Thomas wondered if surviving had been a mistake. He never said that out loud. In 1984, when the reunion letter arrived, it felt like a judgment, a reminder that he was still here when so many were not. For weeks, he didn't answer it. Then one night, he dreamed of Samuel again. This time, Samuel wasn't bleeding, wasn't cold. He was smiling. When Thomas woke up, his pillow was wet with tears. He decided to go. Belgium was quiet in winter, too quiet. The battlefield looked nothing like his memories, and exactly the same at the same time. The air felt heavy with things no one talked about. At the reunion, men hugged awkwardly. Some laughed too loud. Some didn't speak at all. Faces were old, but eyes were young. They talked about training, about bad food, about stupid officers. They avoided names. Later, Thomas wandered off alone and stood near a memorial stone. Snow fell gently, resting on the carved letters. He finally said Samuel's name out loud. For the first time, he didn't feel ashamed. That night, Thomas sat at a small desk in his hotel room. He stared at a blank page for a long time. His hands shook, but he kept writing. He wrote about fear, about love between friends that words never captured, about holding a dying boy and promising things no one could promise, about coming home and realizing that the war had taken more than years. It had taken peace. He wrote until his hand hurt. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully. For the first time since 1944, Thomas slept without nightmares. Back in Ohio, life continued as usual, But something had shifted. Thomas spoke a little more, smiled a little easier. The war didn't disappear, but it loosened its grip. A year later, cancer came quietly. Doctors spoke gently, treatments were discussed, time became limited. Thomas was not afraid. He gave the letter to his daughter and told her to read it after he was gone. People should know, he said, not about battles, about the cost. Thomas Eli Carter died on a calm morning. Snow fell outside the hospital window. At his funeral, people talked about his work ethic, his honesty, his love for family. They did not talk about Bastogne. That night, his daughter sat alone and opened the letter. She met a young man she had never known, a boy who went to war believing he would come back unchanged, a friend who carried another man's death for 40 years. She cried, not just for her father, but for all the men who came home silent. She later donated the letter to a local museum. No spotlight, no headlines, just words on paper. Visitors sometimes stop to read it. They stand quietly, some wipe their eyes, some think of relatives who never spoke about the war. And for a brief moment, Thomas is remembered, not as a hero, not as a symbol, but as a human being. And that is how history truly survives. Not in victories, not in speeches, but in the lives quietly shaped by things no one ever fully escaped.